Okay, now when the pressure is on these guys, we can start the panel discussion. And Oliver, until very recently, crowdfinancing activity was seen as a tiny niche and with little prospect of ever impacting the broader financial system. Even now, experts suggest that the growth of P2P business lending, equity-based crowdfunding attracts institutional investors. How crowdfunding will develop in the future? Will it compete with traditional financing sources? Maybe it's going to change them even. What are your thoughts?
Thank you. It's quite interesting. We've just seen on your slide that it is still a niche market in most of the European markets. The UK probably being an outperforming market due to certain circumstances and advantages regulation. But crowdfunding is in Europe about 10 years old. Zopa, the first lending platform in the UK, now turns 10. And we've seen the business models applied in the market mature and the platforms operating professionalize to a degree that over the last, well, actually it's probably only 1 to 2 years, the established financial services industry has taken a noted interest in what we call crowdfunding, from peer-to-peer lending to equity finance and also reward-based crowdfunding. And we today see banks actively involved in crowdfunding. So BNP Paribas has joined our network because they are cooperating with an equity crowdfunding platform. Their digital bank is going to launch a reward-based crowdfunding platform across Europe. We see banks like Santander in the UK working closely with peer-to-peer lending platforms. We have German banks that give their banking license to crowdfunding platforms so that they can operate under German banking law in the crowdfunding space. We have seen venture capital funds like Start Green in the Netherlands or Triangle Ventures in Germany set up their own crowdfunding platforms to do equity crowdfunding. And we see, even on a higher level, institutional investors, hedge funds in the US already actively in Europe starting to look to allocate assets into crowdfunding transactions, especially peer-to-peer in the UK, which has scaled a lot. But we've also seen that in, for example, France, a large bank has allocated 100 million euros in co-investment on a peer-to-peer lending platform over 4 years. So it is already happening. And I think the fact that crowdfunding is still a niche market has nothing to do with the potential and the real impact it already has. I think we are now at a stage where it will rapidly and exponentially grow, not only in the UK, but also in the other markets that have created favorable conditions. And I think in 5 years' time, we potentially see a number of banks outsourcing their smaller loan business to crowdfunding-like operations or crowdfunding platforms, or especially peer-to-peer. And we will see business angels doing transactions on online crowdfunding platforms such as AngelList and the like that exist also in Europe. And we will see venture capital funds potentially pool together in deal flow through similar platforms. So I think this actually is the digitization of the financial services industry. And we've already taken the first hurdle. I think now it's really about which country still wants to be a leading player in the market and which country will be left behind. And we will talk later on about regulation, but there's a variety of views and a variety of actions across Europe that we then discuss, and probably not now.
Yeah, thank you. As you mentioned, a lot of banks and private equity funds are establishing crowdfunding platforms. And here we have Martinas from Startup Highway, which is a business accelerator and early stage seed fund. Do you see crowdfunding as a competitor for you? Or could it become one of your tools to invest in early stage firms?
I probably would choose the second option in that case, simply because it's definitely not competitor. I mean, taking from that perspective that the guys could prove the concept and applying to us, that's for us, it's easy to choose. On the opposite side, let's say, if they leaving our accelerator and doing successful crowdfunding. It's actually the credentials for us. Like actually we're just adding to the success story in that case. So definitely I'm seeing that mostly as the funding tool and diversification for that, but definitely not as a competitor.
Okay, but basically you're working with people's money. And another interesting aspect which bothers me, will Lithuanians invest in startups through crowdfunding platforms? Or maybe it could be only shaped for financing small and medium enterprises?
Well, take from the two perspectives. One, we everybody agree that this is actually very risky investment. That's the one thing, we know that. And the second one, I mean the locals probably actually prefer the locals. What the main aspect is for the local platforms here, that that you might fund the company, startups who are just looking, let's say, for the social aspects or for the local business. Where you're going to the accelerator, the seed funds, simply taking from the math down there, you're simply looking for the scalability and for the global business. So there is no chance in that case, let's say, for the local ones, which is actually working in your society. From the another point of view, I mean, if you're investing like the startup, let's say, just looking for the funding globally, nothing precludes, let's say, to ask you on the platform here. The main reason for that is simple. I mean, the local investors prefer good businesses, but actually which is also from the same country. So I mean, this more or less fulfill each other, let's say. So that's my point.
I see that someone wants to comment on this.
Just a very brief comment on that. I should say that investors is usually looking to share the risk. And sometimes combining the angel investments and the crowdfunding investments, if we can say so. So they basically would share the risk. And the thing is, well, basically the situation now in Lithuania is where sometimes there is a challenge to consolidate the investments, right? Because let's say the angels from the accelerator think that's a great investment, but maybe they need a bigger scale of investments where you could get add-on from the crowdsources.
And Dovydas, as you started talking, I just have a
now
few
I'm going to get
for
the
you,
punishment,
yeah.
right?
Not a punishment, but a few questions. Will crowdfunding can change business environment in Lithuania? You are working with all the environment of business here in Lithuania. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I would not say that it's, we don't speak about now, the revolution. It's basically, as the Oliver said, it's going to be the evolution, right? So I think it's going to enhance the atmosphere because if you now take at the startup level, so if you want to raise around 200,000 euros, you might go to accelerator, you might go to the angels, and you might go to the seed fund. But when you outgrow the number of investment, you're lucky if you get the follow-up investment from the angels or the VC fund. If not, what would you do? You go bust. So I think for some of the startups that would be going to be great, next stage capital in terms of, raising another seed round, they would basically might go for the crowd fund, as already many startups did in the UK, Spain, and the other markets. And I think, looking from that perspective as well is once again the consolidation and sharing the risk of the early investors. So it's going to only enhance the present market, which is not sufficient in terms of the capital. We know that a lot of money lay in the banks, but it's not, the working capital. It's not employed yet, and the system would allow you to do so and share the risk with other crowdfunders.
So basically our system has to enhance the confidence of retail investors to ship their money.
Absolutely.
Good. So maybe let's move to our international playground. And Justinas, you are working with foreign investments. Do our SMEs and startups have potential to attract foreign investors? And maybe crowdfunding could help them directly to invest money into our companies. How it would work, a proper regulation in Lithuania?
Okay, so it's it's a bit of a long shot from the FDI perspective. Yeah. Currently, what we are attracting, the typical businesses are fairly large companies with mostly multinational companies that are financing is not an issue for them. At the initial stages and when they're looking at locations, they're not thinking about financing alternatives as such. But there are a few limits that we will eventually encounter, and that's, I see alternative finance as one of the ways how we can mitigate that. So currently, most of the companies that come to Lithuania are sort of efficiency seeking. So they are in the mode where they look at how to make their operations more efficient, more effective, more affordable, in many ways to make the business more prosperous, and just to put it that way. We are not attracting market-seeking companies. Market-seeking companies would go where the market is or where the saturation of the market is. So eventually, if we want to have some astonishing brand names operating here, we can look at the experience of some of the Scandinavian countries, or say Israel as an example. So they actually attract the engineering centers of top-notch companies simply by building a local competence. So they attract asset-seeking companies simply by financing, helping local startups build up businesses from scratch. And this is what, this is what rich companies are looking at, the companies that are not in the efficiency mode, but in a building mode, in an asset-seeking mode. So this is kind of, the best way crowdfunding could contribute to attracting foreign companies.
And I know that Invest Lithuania is working on a draft law on electronic identity, which should allow foreigners to easily establish companies here. Do you see here some synergy with crowdfunding?
Well, definitely there is. I mean, everything related to e-registering and e-citizenship and e-business is only part of what we do, and there is so many more institutions involved. But obviously, as a country, as an economy, it seems to me that we're moving from the top when we are attractive because we have some fundamental factors. But in order to remain attractive, we need to be a location with which has something, better than the others, some sort of an edge. So, e-citizenship is basically claiming that you are an attractive place to do business or an attractive place to live. So, if you want to be a location like that, you would be, many more things are being considered, including what is the efficiency of the market, how can I get financing, is there alternative financing, how can I start, support, and finance my business. So this is where it comes into place.
So basically we have to look at regulation on crowdfunding and law on e-identity as a one package.
In a way, it's all connected. In a way, it's all connected. So I'm saying that some of the things right now are not being considered by foreign companies and foreign entrepreneurs, but in a few years' time, they will. So it's kind of, it's a conscious decision where we want to move and how, adventurous we want to get.
Just to make a comment to that and maybe follow up on what your Vice Minister mentioned earlier about the Capital Markets Union paper from the European Commission. This is, of course, not an official comment now, but there are some voices in the industry, business angels, early stage investors, and so on, that doubt that the European Commission will be able to create a capital market union that is harmonized across Europe, because it's an incredibly difficult task and would take years. And one of the ideas is the exploitation of e-citizenship that you already have up here in the Baltics in Estonia, and consider if it is possible to register as an e-citizen, either way as an investor or an entrepreneur, so that investors can actually invest as e-citizens into companies held by e-citizens in Estonia. If that would work, that of course would also be an option here for your own economy. There would be a number of business angel consortia that would be very excited to be able to do cross-border transactions at very low cost and very efficiently. And then that local ecosystem would actually scale as if you want, as a Silicon Valley type neighborhood, just because it is possible to do investments on cross-border level. And that is also a consideration for crowdfunding platforms of certain types, of course.
Thank you very much for your comments on that. It's very useful to hear the European level. And also here we have Sergey. And I know that Sergey has a lot of international experience in launching games. And I know that he's launching his own game and crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarters. So why crowdfunding?
It's a combination. I would look at Airbnb, maybe, and Uber. I was thinking how to link these two things together. But if you look at Airbnb, it's the largest service to provide accommodation that doesn't own a single property. So 20 years ago or 50 years ago, you'll need a lot of money to build a hotel and operate the hotel. And you could only do this if you were a large enough company. And now you don't own the property. You don't need to invest money into this real estate. If you look at Uber, which probably is the biggest fleet right now, they don't own cars yet. So they operate, but they don't have any inventory. And that means that that business became much more accessible to companies that don't really need capital. If you look at crowdfunding in the video games industry, if you look at the music industry, film industry, then you skip the whole underwriting stage. You skip the sale of your project to backers who will then sell it to market. You sell directly to market. And so you skip a lot of unnecessary steps that you had to go through before. If you want to make a new movie, you know, you'll have to go through hundreds of meetings and confirm everything and then secure maybe bonded funding, and you have to have everybody recognized by the bonding agency before you can access the capital. If you go on Kickstarter with your movie, you can get, what, $10 million, $20 million, skipping all of that and putting all of your efforts into actually creating the content. And I think what we're seeing with crowdfunding in the creative industries is that you don't need to be that big anymore to access the funding on that scale. I think last week or 2 weeks ago, one of the video game projects passed the mark of $75 million collected through crowdfunding. And they didn't do a single pitch to any of the investors in that process. They're going to hit $100 million by the end of this year without a single meeting with people in suits and tie who would look at them and say, yeah, maybe no. They skip that. They just go to the market, and the market knows what it wants, and the market gives them the money. And the community for that project is 800,000 people right now. So what happened was those people with money and interest, it's a space simulation game, so you could say a hobby interest, they connected with the team that was willing to develop that project. And all of those stages in between, they just disappeared. So much more money goes into content as opposed to other comparables. And I would say there are two things that are important for us in terms of crowdfunding is getting the funding, but also getting the crowd. And if you look at Spotify, you see people not only listening to music, but also making playlists. So they become sort of creators. They give some input, and if I like your playlist, I will save it, and then you may become popular, and 100,000 people will follow your selection of music, even though you don't produce your own music. What happens with crowdfunding is you engage those people very early, and they help you shape the product, so you get the community. And I would say this is the same story as getting smart money. You don't just need the money, you need people who will come with this money and help you make your business better. And in this case, you get 100,000 people who are committed, who are knowledgeable, because that's why they invested, first of all. And they are the early adopters who are very active. So you get them to help you make a better product, and then typically you can multiply the sales 10 times, and then you get your end result. So I think this is not only about money, it's also about the engagement and about general, let's say, large number of consumers becoming more than consumers and helping you with this project to make things happen. And it's really healthy for creative industry, for sure.
So can we say that crowdfunding is a good marketing place for new inventions, games?
Absolutely. You use the feedback, you use the contact with the community before you ship the product to make it better. So instead of shipping, one version and the second and the third, you may be shipping 23rd just from day one.
Martynas, you are chief portfolio officer at Startup Highway, do you push your startups to go to the crowdfunding platforms and to test their ideas on international level?
First thing, probably nobody pushing. I mean, anybody would say, no. That's wrong word to use. But simply just tag to the colleague. I mean, just distinguish between two things. I mean, the crowdfunding is also not also the money, it's the publicity, which is really important. Accelerator is more or less the business concept supporting, let's say, and actually analyzing and build up. That's two a bit different things. In terms, let's say, if you're just going for the crowdfunding, and why is that fulfilling the accelerator? For example, accelerators, let's say, without probably serious seed funding backing or venture capital backing, then try not to invest in the business models which is actually money consuming, simply like e-commerce, games, and so on in that case. But, I mean, taking that front from the crowdfunding side, let's say, which is really good. In that case, we're just receiving the proof of concept, which actually might present to the VCs and saying that works without your initial bet, investment. So in that case, I would say that this first is this publicity plus, and the accelerator is definitely something like the analysis and the build-up to the companies, which in my opinion fulfill each other, so as a part of the ecosystems.
I could maybe just add a bit about Lithuania. Lithuania is what what a lot of people were discussing is Lithuania is a market, but it's also the place where the East meets the West. So if you talk to startuppers, they would say there's an agenda of making Lithuania the place to launch your startup. If you're coming from Minsk or Moscow or Kiev, you don't have to move to Stockholm or London. Maybe you can move to Vilnius and set up your business here and get the money. And I think this month, the first deal like this happened in our industry where the investor guaranteed that they will invest the money if a Russian studio sets up the company in Vilnius, because they trust Vilnius as the business environment, and at the same time it's close enough to the, let's say, original country of the team that they will not be disrupted by the move. And in terms of crowdfunding, if Lithuania makes the step forward, if Lithuania becomes crowdfunding friendly, then this could be the place where the East will raise the money from the West, where someone from Minsk can raise the money from German consumers, but that's sort of halfway. It's in European Union, but that's close enough to the developers from Minsk who can still feel safely, and the costs will be quite limited. It's much easier than going to Germany.
I think we just for clarification, of course, we're now talking about what is usually called reward-based crowdfunding or pre-sales crowdfunding, or at least in your example and also in your discussion. So this is a commercial transaction where you buy a product in advance, like a subscription for a magazine. And this would be regulated under commercial law, so it's a transaction, and you have certain consumer protection. And we talked a bit about equity crowdfunding, so as an investment into shares, which then is regulated under capital markets law. It has, therefore, a financial services background, and it's a completely different structure and will be different dealt with. And we also discuss, and of course the title of the conference somewhere here is marketplace lending, a US term for lending. So this is actually credit to consumers or debt to companies, which works very, very different if you look at the large UK platforms that have scaled up, where there is basically no involvement into the project. It's more an allocation of money that is then handed out to a number of projects to diversify your risk. I think we have to look at, and if we talk about crowdfunding as the overarching theme, we also have to look at how these things work together and can work together extremely well, I think, where we have reward-based crowdfunding as a development of the idea, the first market test, also, and especially for ideas that have failed to attract venture capital, like the Pebble Watch or like other things that then were very successful afterwards. And for those that have successfully done these transactions, equity crowdfunding can be a first level of investment. And we've seen even on equity A rounds, so up to 5 million euros being invested in Europe, Germany, UK. And then it becomes interesting to also do lending. So we also have the whole early stage ecosystem for finance here. And I think this is what makes crowdfunding or this ecosystem extremely interesting, and where other players like venture capital funds, accelerators, incubators are starting to look at this. And I think this is what you have to look at when you want to create crowdfunding in Lithuania. It's not only this or that, it actually has to address all of this to make it work.
At this moment, Lithuanian authorities suggested only to regulate lending-based and equity-based crowdfunding and left outside the reward-based crowdfunding. What are your thoughts about that?
That is common practice across Europe because reward-based crowdfunding actually doesn't really need regulation. The regulator usually is a financial services regulator and is concerned about financial services, and that in reward-based crowdfunding would be the payment process, which usually is done by a third party. You know, you have a PayPal, Ogon, whatever they're called, service providers that do these transactions that are fully licensed. And so you as a platform then are just a marketplace, just like eBay, selling a product. There are certain consumer rights issues that may have to be addressed about, you know, the right to return a product. You know, if you buy a product 6 months in advance and then it comes back and then you have the right to return it, that could become a real issue for the person that does the crowdfunding project. But this hasn't been an issue so far in any country, but it might be. So that I think if the regulator says we want to look at lending and equity, he talks about financial services, and it doesn't mean that you cannot do reward-based crowdfunding. In theory, that should be possible, but there might be national, you know, restrictions, of course.
Yeah, of course, but we have to have a full package of crowdfunding platforms, including investment-based, lending-based, and also reward-based crowdfunding platforms.
Ideally, yes, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, I like numbers a lot. So, Dovydas, talking about the alternative finance market, Estonia in total volume per capita takes second place in Europe after the United Kingdom. Can we be next to these two countries? Can we change our attitude in financing and enhance retail investors to shift their money?
You know, our history is such we first look at what the failures Estonians do and then we do better. So I think absolutely. In terms of, you know, the startup community, we, you know, at first we were looking what's happening there, then we just imitated and done better, right? That's the first thing. So, and in terms as well of the attracting investments, you know, just the guys reach outstanding results. So I think, you know, absolutely, yes. And, you know, in such way I always tell, you know, to presenting Lithuania in terms of the, as investment country or as a startup country, say, you know, we always run faster because we try harder. So in terms of, in all the terms, absolutely yes. The first thing, looking at the equity crowdfunding, yes, here the angels wants to share their risk because it's not sometimes the money enough smart, right? The second, what we've been told, yes, we need, you know, to crowdfund the fund and the crowd as well. So as Sergey was telling in his blog recently, just a couple of months ago, that Vilnius is becoming the game garage. Yes, 40 studios are here. They need to crowdfund their games, absolutely. That definitely the move of Sergey will definitely help that. You know, because when we see the successful story, it's, you know, other jump on the wagon. And in terms of, you know, even the National Bank just recently published a paper which says the recommendations to do the crowdfunding in Lithuania. And the Ministry of Finance organizing as well the conference later this year. So I think we're moving now the right direction and the train starts, you know, to rolling. And then it will reach, I hope, very soon, very fast speed, and nobody, you know, just couldn't, everybody will be running behind. Yeah, that's absolutely, you're absolutely right.
So basically we have to take modern regulation on crowdfunding and make it better here in Lithuania.
Yeah, and do some, you know, what was just been told before, and do some, you know, it's not only the crowdfunding itself. You know, you have to prepare yourself. You have to market yourself. You know, you have to have people who already know how to crowdfund, right? You have to hack the crowdfunding itself. So I think there's already a lot of, you know, people when we advise startups, and I received the call yesterday night. The guy was talking somewhere in Cholet, who is now the pilot of the military aircraft. So he wants to launch his own startup. That's interesting, right? Military launching their own startups. But it's startup about and I hope these guys will be very successful, because he doesn't have his own money, right? And he wants to have a system which spans across the Europe. So his idea is to crowdfund the money for his system. You know, it's a brilliant idea.
Did he ask whether Lithuania has a crowdfunding platforms?
He just asked, you know, where I could find enough material, how to market myself in the crowdfunding platforms.
Okay.
But he will be, one small idea, that he would be, of course, willing, if there would be any crowdfunding systems, he would be willing to crowdfund locally. Absolutely, yes.
I think in that sense, crowdfunding actually, in all forms, very much is aligned with what startup entrepreneurs today think. They all grew up with this lean startup methodology, which you know, comes out of the fact that startup company today is cheap, not expensive. 15 years ago, if you wanted to build an IT company, you needed to have 1 million euro to buy a server rack somewhere and then buy the licenses. Today, it's on the cloud. Partly you get it for free. There's open source software everywhere. So everything is fairly cheap, and the lean startup methodology tells you you should start and fail early. So not, you know, put much effort into this. And this is what crowdfunding can do you on different levels. Yeah, you can do it with reward-based crowdfunding. You can do your first equity investment over 50,000 or 100,000, you know, euros, and every time you see feedback and you build your thing. So this very much goes that direction, and it's part of the collaborative economy we discussed about with Uber and with Airbnb, which is we share our resources and ideas. We are not stuck to intellectual property rights as some of the larger companies are. We are more willing to maybe discuss openly. I think this is where crowdfunding really fits in, and where the younger generations, but also some of the older generations, are very open to engage in. If you look at the statistics of investors in equity crowdfunding, on some platforms, the average is about 50. So that suggests that these are people with money that, you know, have experience, that are willing to take risks. If you look at reward-based platforms, I think you can talk much more about that later on when you talk about lending platforms and you talk about TrustBuddy. Also there, it's a wide variety of people, but they are all understanding the power of these systems. And I think this is what we need to understand, and maybe also, you know, the minister has gone already, educate our policymakers about that. Basically, this is a system we are all very much used to. Yeah, this is the basics of democracy. This is when we go for election, when you re-elect this gentleman who has left now, then you pledge a percentage of your future income to his ideas that he has sold you on a poster on the street and on a 30-second advertising on TV. On that basis, you pledge, probably in this country, I don't know, 35% of your income or 50% of your future income. If your average income is, I don't know, what is it, yeah, 30,000 euros a year, that's 15,000 euros a year, you pledge as an investment into the activities of a government based on a poster and a video. That is crowdfunding, yeah, in its basics. But so we already live it. We accept this. Yeah? We share these things. And crowdfunding actually is a very similar approach. And people who engage in this, they're willing to take this risk. And so this is, I think, what we need to explain our policymakers as well.
And also we have to educate people and investors. We will have the first panel discussion about regulation, but not all of speakers here are going to participate there. So I would like to ask them what recommendations to our regulator and to share those recommendations with the crowd here in this conference. Let's maybe start from Martinas.
From my point of view, it's actually clearly to bring the message that is risky. I mean, that's not for everybody. That's probably would be the main one, what I would say. Because, I mean, and probably put some extent of the proportion, let's say, with the money you might put in that case, some limited, something like for the savings or something like that. That probably would be my thoughts.
I think Germany is now following to the reward-based crowdfunding, as we discussed. Kickstarter is coming after moving from the US to Canada and then to the UK, then to Scandinavia, then Netherlands, and finally it's going to happen in Germany, but it's not available in the Baltics. So for example, we have to create an American subsidiary to go through that to source funding. But if Lithuania would actually make a step forward to embrace the companies that operate crowdfunding platforms and enable Lithuanian companies to crowdfund without opening a subsidiary, then I think there will be more incentive, first of all, for the Eastern companies to come here, and second of all, it will be just cheaper. I won't have to pay American lawyers to just technically to make it happen, because anyway, it's going to happen here. And I think what you said is very right in terms of failing early, because if you go to a typical Kickstarter project in the creative field, you have 10,000 projects that look almost the same, and then 90% of them fail and 10% succeed. And what the people who failed learn is they learn that there are subtle differences that they don't master yet, but they keep trying and trying until they're successful. And like in ice hockey, you have to have top stars making tons of money, not because they deserve that, I don't know, but because all the kids, they look at that image and they wake up at 6 in the morning or at 5 and they go to train because that drives them. And I think we need the same thing for businesses. You need Lithuanian companies that are super successful in crowdfunding, and that'll motivate 100 other companies to go and try out. I think about months ago there was a card game. It's a deck of 120 cards that raised $9 million within 4 weeks from 200,000 people. And everybody paid $30, $40 each. And it's just 3 guys. One of them is an artist and 2 are designers. So, this can happen. There's nothing that stops 3 Lithuanian guys and girls of doing the same. And it's just the process of getting them there. And I believe the faster crowdfunding comes here, the more you'll have businesses like this. And then eventually one of them succeeds, and then we have a second wave.
As well, just, not much to add, but once again, we are kind of in the place of Northern Europe where, crowdfunding exists and it's already have many of effective campaigns, and there's already a lot of success stories. So I hope, Sergey, you'll be, the first one to imitate, but not US, but Lithuanian one. And the other thing, once again, as we support, Enterprise Lithuania supports the startups, for us is very crucial, the people would continue on funding their business. And this alternative would give them a great freedom. I would not say from the banks, no, but would get, crowdfund for their, businesses where sometimes, the financial institutions which are well established do not understand that very well. And to make the success stories, we could, share in the world. So I would really welcome the crowdfunding coming faster to Lithuania, and, both lending, equity, they would go quite well, because we establish, annually 10,000 businesses. 10% could be easily crowdfunded, I should say.
Well, I started to think about, there's so many good things already told about crowdfunding, so I guess we are all on the same page on that one. But, looking a bit more global, it's just, it's interesting times that we live in, thinking about so many new technologies and business models emerging. So, crowdfunding might be placed within the sharing economy mode. But then, it sits next to drones, it sits next to robotics, it sits next to augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and you name it. So there is, so many more things coming into our lives. And I find it fascinating that, currently countries and cities realize that this is the new battlefield. So, who gets the best drone company? Who gets the Bitcoin? Who gets something else? who gets the autonomous vehicle, for example. Now, the difficulty in crowdfunding is just the same issue. The difficulty here is that if you want to be exceptional, you need to understand that you might be hurt on the way. It means that you have to tolerate higher level of risk and to do something that others cannot. So, as an economy, as a society, you need to allow the playground to be bigger than it is in your competition. And this is what makes companies, investors, private businesses, and entrepreneurs come. So that's kind of the big issue. So I wish that Lithuania will be as adventurous, as it could be, basically.
Well, I don't want to talk too much about regulation because there's a whole panel on that later on. But I mean, maybe, of course, regulation is all about being risk averse and has to protect society, and it's usually about systemic risk. And crowdfunding doesn't offer any systemic risk. If at all, it offers the option to diversify. But so when we look at the risk in crowdfunding and the risk of losing money, it's also the opportunity to invest money, because you don't have that anywhere else, right? If you go to your local bank now and I ask you tomorrow morning, go to your bank and say, look, in Estonia, I heard we have, how many startups do you have in Estonia or small businesses? 50,000? No matter, you say, I heard we have 50,000 startups and small businesses. Can you give me a list of them? I want to invest in them. No bank will give you that. Yeah. Let me tell you, I'm sorry, we have Super Saver 5,000, Super Saver 5,000 plus. And if you're rich, you have these 3 options to invest in as well. That is roughly the option you get. And they don't even know what they sell you. Yeah, we learned that in 2008. They sell you something they don't understand. So there's a risk. Yeah, we are not anymore. We don't have the choice to invest where we want to invest in. We have to trust institutions that are established by law. Yeah, in a monopoly. In some countries, France had a banking monopoly that the regulator has now broken apart in favor of crowdfunding because the banks had too much power. And we should also talk about risk when we talk about banks. These are the organizations that created the financial crisis we live in. And do you know how many of our European banks have been convicted as criminals in front of US court? And if you ask me what an organization is that is a criminal convict, that's a criminal organization, we call that the mafia. Yeah? So there's something you have to question. Can an organization that has been convicted in front of law, in front of a court of law as a criminal, still continue to operate, managing the money of our society, manage the money of our government? And I think this is the basic problem we're actually addressing here, is that a lot of people have lost their trust in the banking system. Yeah, and there are surveys on this that actually show that many people don't like to trust their money to the bank. And why would you today? In some countries you have negative interest rates. Can I pay you so that you keep my money in the hands of Madoff or some, I don't know what funds that will lose the money? So there's a huge distrust and a huge search for new ways. And crowdfunding being extremely risky, and we are uncertain about what it is and what it can do, and we're still hoping to see more professional players come across. This is offering an opportunity. And so this is, I think, what we have to focus on. The problem is, and we discussed that later on the regulatory panel, that the regulators are people that do not think like this. Yeah, they think differently. And I think this is the real challenge we have to address. We have policymakers like the minister that wants to be re-elected in 2 years or 3 years, so he will make promises and need to be innovative. And then we have regulators that get only negative feedback if they make a mistake. Nobody ever goes and says, well, isn't the economy doing well? Thank you, Mr. Regulator. It never happens. Yeah? It only happens as what a fuck up. It's your fault. Yeah? And if you ask the regulator, they said, well, I only enforced the laws that you wrote. The minister will never say, yes, you're right, it was my fault. It doesn't happen. So this is the problem we are actually addressing. And this panel here is really on the policy side. And this is where you have to create a crowdfunding platform. That is your job. Yeah? No, you have to set an example. The city of Lisbon is creating a crowdfunding platform. They are setting an example. They say, we need to do this. Yeah? And it can be something within the legal framework, of course. And you should be looking at, as an institution, what can we do with crowdfunding and be an example to your local economy. So this is what you can do. And, you can look at, okay, it's not really our playground, but maybe there's something we can do. Let's learn, yeah? And encourage more people to fail so that we can improve it. I think with that expertise and that lesson, you will get a better regulation.
So do we have an agreement here between...
Just a small annex. I just say that 2 years ago when our startups visited Stockholm, and we met a bunch of the crowdfunding guys. So we invited them actually to come with just their systems to Lithuania, not to, just to have some of the crowdfunding extensions or nodes, if you like. So it hasn't happened yet. But I think so. We've done the first step in order to attract the crowdfunding platforms. So I hope that this conference is a good start. So together with the help of all the panelists here, as well as Justinas as representing Invest Lithuania, that it is well with our mutual help. It's not only local crowdfunding platforms will start, but as well some of the platforms will come to Lithuania from the Scandic origin.
I hear some rumors that Investor, the biggest Nordic equity-based crowdfunding platform, is willing to come to Lithuania and start their activities here as soon as the new regulation will be adopted. So we are looking forward for that. And I hope Oliver will share more secret formulas later on. And maybe there are any questions from the audience. There's one.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Asta, and I work for a small crowdfunding platform in the Netherlands. And as the European Crowdfund Network representative noted, that banks also started to crowdfund. And so crowdfunding is kind of started to transfer from crowd to banks. And so we wonder, how can we compete with them, and just in general, what's going to happen in the market? So could you comment on that? How can we compete with big banks that take the crowdfunding from the crowd?
No, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that either. Basically, banks own the crowd, right? They have access to interesting projects because everybody goes there and says, I need money, and they have access to the people that have the money. And if they would have been smart, they would have started 10 years ago, but they are not smart, and they have legacy IT systems, so that is more potentially your advantage. And it's very few yet. In the Netherlands, I think it's only 1, 2 already. In Belgium, it's 2.5. I think you just have to be fast, and you have to create a niche. There are certain areas that I'm sure banks will never touch. They will be generalistic in their approach. And so likely we will see niche players that have, say, a certain region they work in, or a certain sector, very specific, certain gaming areas or so, that will be very successful. And then you will have generalist platforms that may be operated by banks, but maybe not. Maybe banks will fail in the market because decision-making in banks is very long, and then it takes years before somebody signs a piece of paper, and you may have to act quicker. So we have to see. You still have hope, but you're right. There's a downscaling happening now from professional financial services institutions into this market, but I don't think it is at this stage serious enough to really threaten you because the market is still too small. I mean, we hear Jens talk later a little bit about lending and TrustBuddy. There's a market that is scaling up very much quicker, and I think that is an area where we would see banks move much, much faster than other areas.
Do we have any other questions?
Can I ask you, can you be more specific when Lithuanian companies will be able to lend in the market? Because you spoke about lots of nice things, but can you be more specific on that? And what should happen that companies can be able to borrow in the market? Thanks.
I think that we want to hear your question once again.
Arturas.
Maybe a different one.
Arturas, can you be more specific when companies will be able to borrow in the market in Lithuania? When?
I hope soon. When? Yes, when?
Well, I mean, you have the lawyer here who knows best, but I mean, the regulator even better. If you want to lend money, It's actually a very good question in a way, because on a European level, there is diversity in the approach of the regulators. The UK regulator decided that crowd lending or peer-to-peer lending is not a depository function, so it's not a banking activity, and therefore platforms don't need a banking license and are much leaner in the operation and can scale very quickly. The German regulator, which is gold plating everything you can gold plate, so that means the lowest level that is possible will be implemented. If you want to do lending, you have to have a banking license. That means you have to bring about 5 million euros along and a lot of time before you have your banking license. So therefore, lending in Germany doesn't scale up. I don't know what the take of the Lithuanian regulator is, but basically the decision is lending or crowd lending a banking activity or not will determine if you will have a thriving lending market here anytime soon or not.
In Lithuania, our regulator sees that lending activities fall under regulation of credit institutions, but now they are thinking how to change the law to avoid that.
And so if they would go to the European Banking Authority, which is an advisory authority in the European institutions that has looked at this and published their opinion on crowd lending earlier this year, they clearly interpret the existing European regulation to that crowd lending is not a banking activity, but because they have no executive power, they ask the European Commission, who has the executive power, to make a clarification on that. If that happens, we don't know, but that would have to either come as a proposal or a recommendation from the Commission to member states, or even within a directive, which is less likely.
Several weeks ago, European Banking Authority has published their recommendations on lending-based crowdfunding, and they said that this activity doesn't fall under regulation of credit institutions, and bank guarantee schemes are not, deposit guarantee schemes are not applicable for such investments. Yeah, basically yes, we have to wait for European Commission. There is one question.
Hi, my name is Alina. I'm actually building one of the crowdfunding platforms, and which is going to be available in Lithuania soon. I have a question. Do you see a synergy between reward and equity crowdfunding? Because there was a crowdfunding platform in the UK which is called Bank to the Future, and they tried to bring together both equity, peer-to-peer lending, and reward, like all the possible alternative finance together. So how do you see the synergy between this, reward and equity in particular, or not? Thank you.
There are a number of platforms that have started out as reward platforms and then turned equity, funded by me, for example. There are a few platforms that combine this. You have a very small platform in Austria. You have to go through a crowdsourcing process before you are allowed to do equity crowdfunding. So they demand that you have a validity test in the market before you do this. And there's a number of platforms that have, let's say, a kind of crowdsourcing or kind of a voting thing before you get into the equity funding. So you have to have so and so many fans and likes and discussions on your project before you can fund. But that is an exception. Personally, if you ask me, and having worked with venture capital and so on, it's a must. Yeah, and I know of business angels that actually give mini rounds of 50,000 euros to projects to do reward-based crowdfunding, because they say, I'd rather give you 50,000 euros to do a really good market validity test so that I can invest later on than if I give you money now and you fail. Yeah, and so I would argue there's a huge combination between these things, but maybe the market isn't big enough, or maybe the traditional investors are not smart enough at large. But for me, it's a must. If I would be an investor in any type of, tech company, early stage company that is consumer focused, I would demand a reward-based crowdfunding campaign before I invest. I would make that an absolute condition. And I believe that in the future that is happening more and more.
So basically, I see that we don't have any more questions from the audience, and we're running out of time. To finalize this pleasant talk, I just want to say that today an overall ecosystem is building from this young industry crowdfunding. And crowdfunding creates business. Crowdfunding provides early-stage investments to startups, growth capital to small and medium enterprises. It stimulates regional ecosystems and economies. The crowdfunding market facilitates millions of euros worth of transactions every day to individuals and businesses alike. So it's time for Lithuania to take its share. Thank you for the panel speakers. Please give them a huge round of applause, and please enjoy the rest of the conference.